So welcome everyone, and let's get started. All right, so let's kick off for our agenda. We're gonna first start with introductions. We're gonna then jump to background and structure of abundant housing LA. After that, we're gonna have our AHLA Council purpose, responsibilities, and procedures. We're also gonna go over committees. Aside from the Housing Council, Advocates Housing Council, we also have committees how you can get more involved with particular topics that we oversee in abundant housing. We'll go through that. We're also going to go through resources and more ways to get involved with abundant housing. And then we have two guest speakers. And we have Shane Phillips, Dulce Vasquez, who are going to be speaking today. And then we're also going to do a small little training with Chelsea Bright as grassroots organizing and getting mobilized. We're also going to do another training with Jamarah Hayner and starting on organizing and campaigning. And then finally Q&A, and lastly, just media adjourned. All right, so let's get started and kick it off with intros. Hello, everyone. My name is Jaime Del Rio, and I am organizing director for Abundant Housing LA. And then I'll pass it to Josh.
Hi, folks. I am Josh Gonzalez, and I am education director at Abundant Housing LA. I'll pass it over to Haley.
Hey everybody, my name is Haley. I'm currently the comms manager with Abundant Housing LA, but I will soon to be moving into an exciting new role, which I'll talk more about later. I will pass it on to Leonora, who's here tonight with us.
Hey everybody, Leonora Kamner, executive director. I use she, her pronouns. Just since we have so many people on tonight, maybe everybody can just introduce yourself in the chat, where you're zooming in from. And yeah, thanks everybody for being here. I'll pass it back to you, Jaime. Oh, and we have David. I saw David in the list. David, I'm gonna pass it to you next.
Hi everyone, I'm David Barbosa. I'm the Director of Policy and Research for Abundant Housing.
All right, thank you guys for the introduction.
Hey, Jaime, do you mind if I just say hello and then so that I can also say goodbye, and then I will leave it all to you.
Sure, I'll pass it to Alex.
Hey, so hi everyone, I'm Alex Schafran. I am the strategic planning consultant for Abundant Housing. This is the most exciting strategic plan I've ever done because this was like one of the things in the strategic plan was to do this, and now we're here and the plan's not even done yet. So we're already winning. But I just wanted to say hello, get a chance to see some of your faces and let you see my face. I have to leave, unfortunately, but we're going to be coming back as part of the second step of the strategic plan in the fall to this group, and just really excited to work with you all. I see some familiar faces from my visit to LA in the winter, and just excited that you're all here. Congratulations for getting here, to the staff. And thank you all to all the members for being here. And thank you all for doing, if anybody wants to make a GIS map, of where everybody lives, that would just be awesome. Thank you all.
Alex. All right, so I'll pass it to Leonora, who will be welcoming us of who Abundant Housing is in our organization.
Hey everybody, so Abundant Housing LA is a pro-housing nonprofit advocacy organization working to help solve Southern California's housing crisis. Our organization supports more housing at all levels of affordability and reforms to land use and zoning codes, which are needed in order to make housing more affordable, improve access to jobs and transit, promote greater environmental sustainability, and advance racial and economic equity. We advocate for housing of all types. We send letters and show up to meetings to speak out in favor of new housing projects. We also conduct research and educate the public, as well as elected officials, on the benefits of more housing. As a 501c4 organization, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in the next few slides, we also engage in political activity to support pro-housing candidates for office. So you can go to the next slide. And so this is our policy agenda, and Anthony DeJusis, our previous policy and research director, helped kind of visualize it with this picture, a picture of a house appropriately. I just want to emphasize that this is always a work in progress. We're constantly coming back to this, evaluating it. I think that's what we appreciate you all being engaged with Advocates Council for, to see, if you can kind of help us continually evaluate this and plan strategy around achieving it, but also kind of come back and say, are there additional policies we should be working on, or should we be speaking on these issues a little bit differently? But right now, this kind of represents our policy agenda, and you can read the full one on our website. So if you want to go more in depth into this policies, it's abundanthousingle.org. But the first pillar, of course, is legalize more homes. Second is make homes easier to build. That's like streamlining, more, faster, easier approval. Fund affordable housing. That's subsidized affordable housing, like making sure that we're getting those units as well. And then strengthening renters' rights. And then all of this is connected to and on a foundation of promoting racial justice and equity. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, and this is just like a quick slide to let you all know that Abundant Housing is actually a couple of different organizations together. The main organization is Abundant Housing LA, the C4 in the middle. It's a social welfare purpose. It sponsors a PAC. We're really hoping to scale up and do more for the fall to support candidates. And then of course we have the C3, Abundant Housing LA Education Fund, which is has an educational purpose. And if anybody feels like they want to discuss this more, like the structure and how these relate together, please feel free to reach out. Okay, so that's it about this slide. Jaime, you want to go to the next one? Okay, so I think I'm passing it back to you now, Jaime.
All right, so I'll pass it to Haley, who's going to go over the purpose of the council.
Great. So our motivations for starting this council is really, there's many layers to this, but the first and foremost, through this council, we would really love to receive feedback and suggestions on important decisions, such as those that concerns our legislative strategies, political endorsements, coalition building, etc. And also secondarily, we would really love to broaden the engagement with our whole entire list. For example, I know folks have a lot of passion regarding political decisions. And typically when we put out an announcement for endorsement, I'll receive emails from people saying, hey, have you considered this, this, and that? And that really motivated us to say, hey, we want to create a space where these concerns will be captured and included when we make those decisions. And also, there is a need for structure for, because we have many committees and many volunteer opportunities. And this is just a space to organize those opportunities so folks have one destination to make an impact with our work. And also, obviously, we would really love to work with you all to create a pipeline of leadership at a local level. We need folks running on neighborhood councils. We need people writing letters to editors, to newspapers. So there are many opportunities for leadership, and we just need a platform to get it formalized. And ultimately, we're hoping that this will scale up and strengthen LA's pro-housing movement. Next slide, please. So the whole goal for this council is to have impact, but remain really flexible. So this may seem like a long list, but it's really easy to satisfy these responsibilities. So the first thing we want you to do is to show your commitment by donating. So this is not about how many dollars we'll generate. This is really just about showing that you're on board with our policy agenda and you're on board with the pro-housing movement. And obviously we understand folks have different needs, and therefore we do provide really generous waivers in our application. And after you submit the application, you just complete a short onboarding process, read our members of volunteer code of conduct, and just really agree to our principle of organizing, and really agree at a fundamental level with our values. And then you're just required to attend 2 general meetings per year. So these meetings will be designed to empower you. We'll incorporate trainings. We'll incorporate, sharing, the performance of all of the committees, and just to get folks on the same page. And we definitely want you to give us feedback and suggestion. That's the whole purpose of the council. But we'll make it super easy, either via emails, text messages, or Slack channel discussions. And we want you all to be ambassador to the movement. So we highly, really urge you to reach out to 5 people in your network, just to kind of chat with them about the need for more housing. We believe that this crisis is literally impacting every single one of us. So there is a need to open up this conversation, because we do believe that through constructive discussion, that's where we get really super impactful solutions. And optionally, we highly encourage you to participate in our members and volunteers only events, training, and discussions on Slack. Sometimes the Slack channels are a little quiet, so I definitely want to encourage you all to participate in that. Next slide, please. So with this new council, under abundant housing outlet, there's basically 3 different decision influencing bodies, I would say. So the staff and the boards are responsible for ultimately making those decisions. And you have the committees, who are people who are volunteering to review policy proposals, candidates, and generate those recommendations. And then we have the Housing Outreach Council, who's responsible for feedback and input. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what will you be weighing in on. So first and foremost, political endorsements. We have a lot of interest in that, but also project endorsements. What type of projects should we mobilize for support? As well as policy positions. David basically had policy position letters coming out weekly. So there's a lot to consider in that area. And also importantly, strategic decision, right? Especially concerning racial equity and concerning sensitive communities, we need as many pair of eyes on those decisions as possible. And I kind of already mentioned coalition partnership strategies. Next slide, please. And the question how, so this concerns my exciting new role. So I'm moving on to becoming the digital advocacy manager / the council coordinator. So I will be the person who send you an alert whenever committees have relevant recommendations to the board or the staff. So basically I will say recommendation alert. This is being determined very soon. And attached to the alert, there will be a poll. I'm thinking super easy, a Google form, 1 question, yes or no, in addition to a space for you to provide feedback. And also we will provide the technical tools, mainly the Slack channels, so that people who are willing to discuss, who want to discuss, have a space to discuss those decisions in the Slack. And the results of the poll and your written feedback will then go to us, the staff and the board, and we'll take those into account when we make decisions. And if you have very specific feedback, we'll even write back to you and say, hey, thank you for your feedback. This is what we thought about your input. Next slide, please. So this is a flow. Recommendations going from committees to the council and to us. Next slide. So here's a question for you. How would you like to receive recommendation alerts? I have this is just 1 question poll. I'm going to launch it right now. Let me make sure that's the correct poll. So it should be launched. Go ahead and take 2 minutes. We have 45 participants, so I'm looking forward to 45 answers.
I think I'm going to show my age because I'm going to put email, but I have a feeling that's not going to be most people's preference.
I'm actually seeing lots of emails.
I put email.
Hi, Chelsea.
Glad to hear there's other email people out there.
Well, I do know what Slack is, and I've even used it, but I hate it.
we understand that Slack it takes a little to get used to, which is why we want to keep it flexible. Give many avenues to be alerted about recommendations.
How's our response looking, Haley?
All right, we're at 92% participation. Come on, 39 out of 42. There's 3 people that's holding out. I suppose, wait, maybe that's us.
Yeah, I think that's us.
I voted.
Okay. All right, 40 out of 42. Okay. Why is there no TikTok option? Let me tell you, making a TikTok video is very time consuming. I have many firsthand experience. All right.
Want to go over some just a couple 2 or 3 recommendations that you see in the results, Haley?
Yeah. So with 40 people have voted, emails definitely won. So 88% of you prefer emails, 35% text, and 30% Slack announcements. So I think email it is. One thing though, my email might go to your spam folder. So I will send out an announcement about this, but what I need you all to do is to manually whitelist the abundant housing LA domain. I will send out a guide on how to do it. It's super easy, but you just have to do it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to see the alerts and you will miss out on the opportunities. All right, well, thanks all. I'll hand it back to you, Jaime.
Oh, you still have one more slide, guidelines.
Oh, yes.
Guidelines and social media and public statement.
Yes, yeah, just really quickly, I want you all to be very vocal and very loud on social media, as well as, just in your daily life to be pro-housing. Obviously, go at it, in your own pace. I know everybody has different comfort levels in terms of talking about housing because it is a personal and sensitive issue. But so here are just some really practical guidelines for you all. You can express personal opinions, but please remain professional and constructive. Be mindful and conservative. If you want to use negativity, your council member didn't vote yes on this project, you can say this is a bad thing, but again, please do it constructively. The same goes for generalization and assertive statements. Definitely don't want you guys to waste the time to engage with trolls. They really feed on that energy. And be mindful with your likes. On Twitter, they can see a history of the posts and tweets that you have liked, and sometimes it will come back to haunt you. And within our organization internally, definitely communicate respectfully and constructively with our directors, staff, with me, or third parties interacting with our organization. Please refrain completely from hate speech, racism, harassment, discrimination, common sense. So yes, next slide, please. Thank you. So I summarize a little bit by saying that there's basically 3 different entities within the organization, and under the committees entity, there are actually 7 different committees. So I'm gonna hand it to Josh, who's gonna kick us off in explaining what each committee does.
Thanks, Haley. So hi, everybody, Josh again. So yeah, let's get into what these committees are doing. So first, we have our education committee. As we spoke about earlier, we said that one of the things that Abundant Housing LA does is to educate the public. Why is more housing beneficial for LA? So education committee is going to help us identify the opportunities that are best suited to inform people about our work. That'll include working on educational materials and presentations, and basically finding the best way to do outreach. Where is the best place to engage, and how do we engage with them? We're also going to be assisting the communication manager in creating media, educational or advocacy content that can be shared through all of the channels that we have. And so this is going to be 4 meetings a year. And so an example of some of the stuff that we will be working on is Housing 101, which is currently been presented by our volunteer education director, Luke Clip. And so things like recruiting new members by attending community events, all of these things are things that we'll get recommendations from the committee about. So next slide, please. Then we have the strategy committee. This is a big one, I feel like, but obviously we go through what are our priorities going to be, a couple or a few times a year. So the strategy committee is going to be giving us recommendations about that, the input on our plans, on our priorities, our coalition building, and there's an optional thing there to become a coalition representative for us, which could be really cool. Again, we mentioned earlier that there's like a pipeline to leadership. I think that this is something that probably serves that purpose there. So for example, we were thinking about asking this in a poll, but we're like, let's just use this for an example instead. But what priorities should Abundant Housing LA focus on in the second half of 2022, right? Like these are the kinds of things that we would be asking the strategy committee. This is going to be 2 meetings per year. Next slide, please. Then we have the endorsements committee. That's a big one, especially right now. So our endorsements committee is going to research and make recommendations on candidates to support. You'll be conducting interviews in key races. So that's great. I think networking is a big thing with that. It'll be great to get some knowledge from all of you because we can do the interviews, we can do that stuff, but not only does that take a lot of time and a lot of effort, but I think sometimes coming from the folks that are just committed to us on the committee and on the council, I think that maybe we can get some different kind of interaction there and get your feedback as to how it went, right, when you're doing those sort of interviews. There'll also be, so those recommendations will go to the Advocates Council for feedback and then to our board. That one's going to meet 4 times per year. So an example of that is like we endorsed Aaron Darling for CD11, Karen Bass for mayor. So you'll definitely want to help us find who has the best creds basically for AHLA to support. So I think who's going to take it now? David is going to take it for this slide.
Hey, thanks, Josh. Yeah, so the Policy and Research Committee is focused on making recommendations to the Advocates Council, staff, and boards on policy decisions, identifying opportunities to advance our agenda through changes in legislation, and trying to shift public opinion. So it involves working with me. I coordinate these meetings, and we're really trying to make sure that our policies are aligned with our values and supported by evidence. So these meetings are held quarterly. And in addition to doing some policy analysis, there are also opportunities to write articles either for our blog or for outside publications to kind of get the word out.
All right, so I'll jump into this. We also have the Project Support Committee. Responsibilities for that are researching potential housing projects for support, identifying what housing developments are appropriate to organize around, and write official letters regarding the design, planning, and construction aspect. Some good examples of this is attending neighborhood councils, meaning by being on the lookout for housing projects, also attending planning commissions meetings. Another good example that a project came from the projects committee that we were discussing is the LA Commons, which was an amazing project that it's going to be in West LA. This project is providing about 1,000 units and about 47% of affordable housing, which came through the Project Support Committee, and then we send it out to the West LA chapters for organizing opportunities. All right, the next one, which is a new committee, is the Racial Justice and Equity Committee. It will evaluate racial justice and equity strategies and check in on progress and metrics towards implementing of strategy. We're thinking of meeting 2 times per year. Some examples that this committee could work on is work on racial justice and equity policy, make recommendations for furthering racial justice and equity, and also just to make sure that we make sure that we discuss like very sensitive policies that can be really effective. So we want to make sure we bring this to the Racial Justice Equity Committee. And the next committee is the Organizing Committee, with over 21 local chapters and coalitions within the LA County that we oversee. We want to make sure we make a real change in your community when it comes to housing. So it's a good way to get really involved with grassroots organizing. The purpose of this is chapter leaders from each community will have the opportunity to check in with the director of organizing, which is meet monthly. The director of organizing will provide support and feedback to all the local chapters in moving forward pro-housing grassroots organizing efforts in their communities. So this is more tailored to grassroots organizing. We do have about over 21 local chapters within LA County that you guys can get involved. However, the organizing committee will reconvene one of the chapter leaders to join to support pro-housing and help you with the grassroots organizing. All right, so let's jump into polling time. Want to launch that poll for me, Haley?
Yeah.
The question is, what interests you the most about Housing Advocates Council?
Already, poll has been launched.
All right, how are the results looking so far, Haley?
61%.
61.
Seeing lots of interest in, the opportunity to provide feedback and on decisions, which is great, but also committees. That's really encouraging.
Yes, so like as we previously mentioned, we have a lot of committees, but also the council is more like a way to have less commitment, however, still provide feedback and support. If you want to get more in depth in our organizing efforts and our policy agenda, definitely encourage you guys to join those committees that we just went over through. And of course, they require more commitment compared to the Housing Advocates Council.
All right, we're at 39 out of 42.
All right, want to go over some of those results, just like 2 or 3?
Yes. Yeah, we got 40. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll, and I realize that you can share the results. There we go. So, yeah, I'm like super encouraged to see that all of you all want to give feedback on decisions as well as the passion for the committees. This is very encouraging. Thank you, guys.
Nice.
Yeah, they're awesome.
All right. So let's get started with resources. That's the resources that we're going to be providing for you guys to be successful with the Housing Advocates Council. We're going to be sending you out a brochure document that lays out all the important things you guys are going to need to successfully complete the onboarding process. You'll be receiving that, and also we'll be doing the communications through Slack, email, texting. That's why we launched a poll to find out what exactly is the best way to communicate. So we're going to still be working on that. So hopefully we choose email, maybe perhaps a Google group email could work best. So we're going to continue discussing that. But of course, there's going to be different means of communication, such as Slack, email, texting. Any other ways that you guys have ideas, please bring them in. We're open for support. Another thing that you guys are going to be sending out is websites, which will provide project support form, endorsement form, policy agenda, and positions we have taken on. Another great thing is being added to our Google Calendar. Oh, it looks like something's missing there, of Abundant Housing LA. So we have a Google Calendar where we share all our events, and you'll be added to that as well. All right, so one of the things to remember to finish for this onboarding task is fill out the application form. Next slide will be the application. So make sure you fill out the application form, including agreement, donation, and commitment to responsibilities. One thing we forgot to mention earlier is that if you are already a budding house in LA, you will automatically be added to this council. You just have to fill out the form, and then we'll check to make sure that you are a donor. Other than that, small little donation will help, but also the benefits of you donating to this is you guys are going to be part of this council, which also it's a benefit of you guys providing like a small commitment feedback. So it's really good. As I mentioned earlier, you'll review resources in the Housing Advocates Council brochure. There's tons of good links in there that I highly encourage you guys to go over, make sure that you get those and read them. Again, sign up for the LHLA calendar, receive, and then also once you sign up, you will receive an official t-shirt and button. And then, so we're gonna give you guys 2 minutes. This is our form. Please fill it out, scan it, and then we'll reconvene in a minute or two. So please scan me and then fill out. We're gonna give you guys some time to fill out this form.
I'm also gonna put the link in the chat, I think, for people.
In the meantime, I'll put like some music so you guys can get pumped up again, filling out the form and getting excited. And okay, let me
Okay, the form's in the chat also, if the QR code is not working for you.
Where are you, music? Okay, so I'm gonna put it. Just for like for a minute or two, fill it out.
She got the brown eyes, caramel thighs, long hair, no wedding ring. Hey, I saw you looking from across the way, and now I really wanna know your name. She got the white dress, but when she's wearing less, man, you know that she drives me crazy. The brown eyes, beautiful smile, you know I love watching you do your thing. I love her hips, curves, lips say the words. Te amo, mommy, I kiss her. This love is like a dream. So join me in this bed that I'm in. Push up on me and sweat, darling. So I'm gonna put the time in. I won't stop until the angels sing. Jump in that water, be free. Come south of the border with me. Jump in that water, be free. Come south of the border with me. He got that green eyes, giving me signs that he really wants to know my name. Hey, I saw you looking from across the way, and suddenly I'm glad I came. Ven para acá, quiero bailar, toma mi mano. Quiero sentir tu cuerpo por mí, estás temblando. Green eyes, shaking your time, now I know we'll never.
All right, well, hopefully you guys fill out the form. I'll be looking forward to getting your sign-in information, and then after that, you are going to, once you sign up for that, you'll be connected to me, and I'll be sending out your t-shirt and then also an Abundant Housing LA button. So looking forward to that. All right, so
that sounds great.
let's jump into our presenters. As I mentioned previously, we have 2 guest speakers, Shane Phillips, Dulce Vasquez, and then we have 2 training opportunities, one by Chelsea and Jamarah. So first, I'll kick it off with Shane Phillips. Just want to point out that he has an amazing podcast called Our UCLA Housing Voice. Highly encourage you guys to listen to it. And I'll pass it to Shane Phillips.
Thank you, Jaime. I'm very excited to be here and very happy that it is virtual because I have COVID and I would have had to bail otherwise, but I could be here online today. For those who don't know me, my name is Shane Phillips and I work at the UCLA Lewis Center as a housing researcher, and I'm the author of a book called The Affordable City, and also have the podcast UCLA Housing Voice, where we talk about housing research in as jargon-free a way as possible. And I used to be the policy director as an Abundant Housing volunteer way back in the days when pro-housing causes didn't really get the kind of attention or funding that they do today. So since I'm here to share some thoughts on why your involvement is so important, I think that history with Abundant Housing is a good place to start. Abundant Housing went from a small group of people really just sending in letters to council members and planning commissions to support individual projects. Those projects didn't really have anyone except developers to stand up for them and say that they mattered and that the people who would live in those new homes also mattered. So that's really all we did back then because that's all we had bandwidth for. And it made sense to start small and simple. Today, Abundant Housing has a real board of directors. It has 5 or 6 staff, a PAC to support pro-housing. 9.
Yeah, we're
there you
gonna be 9
go.
this year.
And most importantly, it has real influence on the policies and programs that will determine how affordable and inclusive and equitable our cities will be in the future. That growth and that power are a result of the efforts of individual members like you all here working together to build up the organization, and just folks getting involved in their communities at different levels, whether that's city committees or neighborhood councils or running for office themselves or just talking to their neighbors, which I think is extremely powerful. And I love seeing that in all the different corners of the county and beyond. I will be the first to say that it doesn't always feel like it, but that engagement is having a real impact. Being involved in housing policy and politics can be disheartening at times, for me anyway, especially when you see good ideas like the state social housing bill that just failed yesterday or today, or SB 50 dying a few years ago, or when you see local politicians make the same arguments about local control year after year after year. Or just, if you kind of step back and look at how prices continue to rise and renters and communities of color are really bearing the brunt of that. I definitely have good days and bad days thinking about and worrying about this stuff. But in the same way that as it makes sense to look back at how far abundant housing has come, I think it's really important and worth taking stock of how far we've all come on the kinds of real world policies that affect people's lives. So we can just think about how things look back in 2015, which was when I graduated from grad school. The entire state was still only building a few hundred ADUs per year. Most cities had no rent stabilization or anti-gouging policies of any kind, nor protections against no-cause evictions. Cities were free to downzone neighborhoods at any point and to any extent, and they were assigned housing production targets that were both totally inadequate and completely inequitable. And contrary to both fair housing and sustainability goals, a huge share of apartments built in the city of Los Angeles were approved by spot zoning, which is a huge deterrent for smaller developers and provides the largest windfalls to big developers. And I think most importantly, at least in a symbolic way, the vast majority of parcels in this state still allowed only one detached home each. All of that is now totally different. And we've made so much progress. I'm not going to go say how all the things I just went through have changed, because I'm sure you're all familiar. But a lot of progress has been made, and I don't really see it slowing down. We almost passed this bill allowing the state to build its own housing to kind of complement the private market, AB 2053. And it seems likely that we'll pass one this year that gets rid of parking mandates in many places this year after our second try, AB 2097. We're seeing some elected officials and candidates that are enthusiastically describing themselves as YIMBYs or pro-housing. And even those that aren't really willing to say that there's no housing shortage anymore, which was very common in the past. It's become kind of embarrassing and anachronistic to say that we don't need to build a lot of homes. There's a lot left to be done, and there always will be. But we should celebrate how far we've come by working together and expecting more of the people who represent us. If I have one real area of pessimism, it's the turn that we've seen taken toward a kind of carceral, punitive response to homelessness that we've seen in the past few years. When we passed Measure H and Proposition HHH 5 or 6 years ago, there was a real hope. I think it was palpable that we could get homelessness under control or maybe even eliminate it entirely. And those initiatives unquestionably did a lot of good and helped a lot of people, but we failed to make the bigger, more kind of upstream reforms that reduce the pressures that put people on the street or in their cars in the first place. And because of that, people are getting fed up with the constructive solutions that things like Measure H and Proposition HHH propose, and they're turning toward more punitive ones that we know aren't effective. And that does really worry me. I think the good news, there's two things really. One is that the recent elections here in Los Angeles show, I think, that there's still a desire for a compassionate approach to homelessness, even if it's maybe weakening a little bit, not as strong as it once was. The other good news, more directly related to abundant housing here, is that groups like this one have been on the right side of this issue from the start. We recognize that while problems like homelessness are often triggered by an immediate crisis and require more immediate solutions, the broader context really matters. A trigger like losing your job or being evicted is more likely to lead to homelessness in Los Angeles than in Houston, because we've created a housing market that's unforgiving of mistakes and oversights or just simple bad luck. Abundant housing, and I'm sure everyone here recognizes that, yes, we need supportive housing, and we need shelters, and we need rent assistance, and we need right to counsel for people facing eviction. But we also just need a housing market that has more options and more affordability for everyone, and ultimately that is more forgiving of everyone, because no one is perfect. And that's really what our housing market expects of people right now. More people are catching on to that fact, and your involvement is certainly critical to spreading the word and building this movement, and it's got us as far as we are today. The last thing I'll say is that I know we have a diversity of opinion when it comes to many issues that abundant housing advocates on, especially things like tenant protections and kind of the state versus private role, things like that. I certainly respect those differing views, and I know they come from a place of genuine concern about the best way to solve the housing crisis and make sure that this is a place that's welcoming to all people. My line on this is that we should all expect a lot more security from our housing situation, whatever it is, whether it's renting or owning, and that we can't let renters be, and other vulnerable populations, be used as kind of the grease that keeps the gears of the housing market turning. And I think sometimes when we put down or put aside things like tenant protections, that's how it can come across. When we're asked to choose between protecting tenants and building the housing we need, we should always ask whether that's a choice we really need to make. Just as an example, displacement protections do make some redevelopments infeasible, but that's only really a problem when we've ruled out higher density development on 80% of our land. So I know we're often put in a position where we have to pick between two or more imperfect options, so I don't want to pretend that we can always wait for an ideal solution. But part of what I'm excited about for this council is the opportunity to bring in a lot of different voices and shape a new and more constructive agenda that doesn't force us anymore to decide between being pro-tenant and being pro-housing. The growth and the diversification of this movement is what's going to make that possible. So I appreciate all of you being here and to be a part of that. And I'm excited to be a part of it with you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shane Phillips. And then I'll pass it to Dulce Vasquez. Dulce Vasquez, we endorse her for CD9, and I'll pass it to you, Dulce.
Yes, thank you so much. So Dulce Vasquez, I live in South Central, and I just wrapped up my first campaign. I was an AHLA endorsed candidate for city council. I spent my career in nonprofits and in higher education, and I had a very steep learning curve when it came to running for city council. But in my gut, I knew that when, the three things that you run on, the top three things that you're always spouting off, housing had to be one of them, particularly after, the last several years. In my gut, I knew that something was very, very broken as we learned of all of the pay to play schemes that were happening in city council and other things, sort of both statewide and nationally, bills not getting passed, et cetera. So I knew it had to be a top priority because I strongly believe that every other societal problem that we have really spokes out of a lack of adequate housing. And therefore, every solution comes from providing housing, whether that's shelters, permanent supportive housing, social housing, housing near transit, rental vouchers, having complete streets, building 15-minute cities within Los Angeles, and protecting people from displacement. So our focus on housing was further cemented as I started talking to more and more of my neighbors and future constituents. I walked into homes that were already split into duplexes, many homes that had 1 to 2 ADUs in the back already. And I often think about Jonathan, the urban planner. He had an article in the LA Times that I was reading at the time where he talked about when he was in the planning department at the county, he had to go around and basically designate ADUs to be torn down because they weren't up to code. And a lot of those were in South Central where we have housing scarcity. So I met also many people that lived in overcrowded homes, 10 or 12 people living in 1 to 2 bedroom apartments. And while I advocated for higher wage jobs and support for small businesses, workforce training and retraining, the fastest solution that I thought was actually how we build more housing so that our aging housing stock either flatlines in price or actually decreases. Housing abundance solves for housing scarcity. And I remember my own experiences back in 2009 in the middle of the recession. When I told my landlord that I was going to move to a cheaper location, they actually decreased my rent for me to stay. And that's the kind of market that we need to move towards. So I'll add here that as a city, second largest city in the country, we need to grow. We need to expect growth. We need to prepare for growth. None of this like nativist BS of people telling us to stay away from Los Angeles or to stay away from California. Even if we had net zero migration, people still have babies. Like, I'm an elder millennial, like there are lots of people having babies, and those babies grow up, and those babies likely don't want to live at home for the rest of their lives, but they do want to live near family. And I will say, like, as a Latina, like, and as a community that is 80% Latino in South LA, we rely a lot on our older generation for childcare, for home care, just for that convivialness that we have. So we need to create spaces for new families, and we need different opportunities for home ownership. I read last week that millennials make up just 4% of homeowners in the country. And that's going to be even lower for Gen Z. So we're being shut out of homeownership, and the future of homeownership will not look like single family homes, nor necessarily should it. It might look like a townhome or a condominium. And we often don't think about building condominiums in poverty-stricken places. So we need to be able to expand what those things look like. So I think SB 9 and SB 10 have created incredible opportunities for this. And now we need to focus on equitable implementation of those policies, particularly in places like South Central. So even though our campaign was not successful, I think we were extremely successful in moving forward the conversation, moving the needle, and being, as Shane said, unabashedly pro-housing and YIMBY candidate, for which I hope it makes the path easier for others. I'm excited to continue to be an advocate for more housing and how we transform and equitably grow our city. So I encourage all of you to join the council and join one of the committees and stay engaged. I will be around as an advocate, as a resource. We just ran a $500,000 campaign, so we know how to do that too. And I'm excited to support other candidates too, because we need them at every level of government, not just on city council, but our county board of supervisors, our assembly, our state legislature, like even our insurance commissioner, right? We need to make sure that we have people set up at every level of government to fight for this and to fight for us. This is our future. So thank you for allowing me some time to speak, and looking forward to meeting all of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those nice words of wisdom, Dulce. Looking forward to working more with you. And I'll pass it to, we're going to start with our trainings. I'll pass it to Chelsea, who is going to be doing a training on grassroots organizing and getting mobilized. She is also one of our board members.
Hey, everybody. Can I first make sure you can hear me okay with the thumbs up? Thank you for the thumbs up. Super affirming. Well, it's so great to be with you all tonight. Unfortunately, I am in like one of the worst positions maybe in all of LA County. I'm sitting right on a sidewalk in Beverly Hills, where housing has been so landlocked for so long. So in some ways, I feel like I'm right in the belly of the beast having this conversation about how we organize and how we do better as a whole entire region when it comes to these issues. And for me, this work has started on a one-to-one, people-to-people level. So much of the good organizing that we do happens. So my professional background is in community organizing, and I was really moved to be a part of Abundant Housing well before it was actually a board because of Leonora, and her and I had the opportunity to connect on a campaign for a council member in Beverly Hills so many years ago. And Leonora opened my eyes to the reality of housing in such a new way when I saw the potential for what we could do when we were organized. So I'm really grateful for Leonora for that. and also because of the people who are missing from this conversation at that point in time. I was a young woman being a part of these conversations, and when we looked around the room, there weren't a lot of people like us. There weren't a lot of people of color at that time. There weren't a lot of intergenerational voices a part of those fights. It was a really small room, and small rooms tend to stay small unless there's a lot of intentional effort to make them bigger. So really applaud Leonora for having a vision to help make these rooms bigger, more diverse, bring new voices into the conversation so long ago. It's what encouraged me to be a part of it and why I'm here today. So I wanted to just share a few things that I know from my professional background in community organizing. It's just sort of 3 values I hold really deeply, and I think they're good things to communicate across in this space today. It is so incredibly important to meet people where they're at. We cannot encourage people to do anything differently than what they're already doing if we're not willing to meet them where they are. We need to make issues personal to people. I know that feels really obvious, and while we feel housing is such a personal issue to us, it may not be the first thing on people's minds, especially right now, given all of the Supreme Court rulings, the state of how we're thinking about our national politics. People may feel very disconnected from their struggles or challenges, or the reality around our housing and rental crisis and homelessness landscape here in Los Angeles. So we have to find ways to make this uniquely personal to them. And we also have to support people into action. We cannot just give them a link. We cannot just make a specific ask. We have to really be supportive of them as they're climbing up that leadership ladder. So I wanted to go into each of these things a little bit more in depth in the time I have. I talked first about meeting people where they're at. Now, asking people to go out of their way for anything is a really, really big ask to make. Just coming to a meeting on a Thursday night, right? Spending 2 hours of your time if you've never been a part of a group before. I know we all have good relationships with abundant housing. We have good relationships with this issue, but think about what the experience of somebody who doesn't talk about housing on a regular basis might be being asked to come to a 2-hour meeting for the first time. It doesn't work so well. So we have to get really clever when it comes to this one-on-one people-to-people organizing. Bring up conversations when you're having more casual conversations with friends, chat at brunch as an example. But I think it's really important when you are taking time to insert conversations like issues we're facing in our community into conversations like that. You don't dominate the conversation and become that person, right? It's great to demonstrate your experience and knowledge as an expert and as somebody who really deeply cares. But I think you want to do it just to the point of piquing interest and then pivot to follow up. It's really important that you sort of grab a hook that people can hold on to and keep pulling them along. Just as important to piquing their interest is actually doing the follow-up. That's where you become an effective organizer, is in knowing what moved people and what needs to keep moving them forward. Now, this is exhausting work because we're talking about doing it one-on-one. But if you can find a way to sort of build the mechanic into your life, that you talk about these issues, you sort of, gauge where people's real interest lies, you find that meaningful way to follow up with them, then they're going to hang with you. It's really important from that lens. I wanted to say next that on the note of making issues personal, we need to figure out what is actually important to people. It may be that they think about housing, but they're in a housing secure space now. Maybe they did have a really tough experience navigating their way into an affordable housing unit, but now that they're there, they really don't want to think about that. It's probably an emotionally traumatizing experience, helping some people get back into that space of thinking about their challenges when it comes to housing. But if we can do that, if we can connect people with their anger and frustration and be a meaningful outlet for some of that rage, I believe that we can transform that feeling of frustration that oftentimes gets really buried into people's consciousness. It's not something that they want to or know how to act on. So if we're able to sort of unearth that feeling of discomfort, frustration, we can help point them into a more meaningful action. I saw this happen in really profound ways with the Residents United Network, a program out of the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing that they run for their tenants who live in affordable low-income housing. It was a really amazing summit that I got to participate in, where tenants of these low-income housing units were all in the same room talking about their experiences navigating the housing landscape, talking about their experiences working with their tenants, their landlords or other tenant experiences. And they were encouraged to speak in a way that shared their frustrations. We're not often encouraged to vent as a means of productivity, right? But I thought this was a really incredible thing because we didn't stop the conversation at venting. There was a moment where we pivoted and reframed our vent with the tool of this sentence that I'm going to offer to you all that says, there ought to be a law that addresses this frustration that I have, right? There ought to be a policy that addresses this frustration I have. There ought to be a resource that helps me when I'm experiencing these challenges. That sort of pivot and reframe is so empowering to people who have never felt themselves in the seat of being able to have meaningful policy impact. Now, this is the type of policymaking I think so many of the leaders, Dulce, so many people who've run for office that are YIMBYs, that are pro-housing people, something that I try to do in my own work is position the voices of the most impacted. And the more we can help see everybody who's affected by housing, who's affected by soaring rents, by difficult to deal with landlord situations as policymakers into themselves, the more powerful we are as change makers. So I really encourage you to think about that. Allow for the vent to happen, and then insert that sentence. There ought to be a law to address this frustration or concern. There ought to be a resource to address this frustration and concern. And from there, we can build power. We don't have to let somebody think that now it's their job to go build that policy. We can point them back to this fabulous organization, Abundant Housing, who's doing that really amazing work of policy making, right? And the last thing I wanted to speak to is supporting people into action. Now, we've all sort of given a credit to Haley and those amazing emails that come out helping guide us to take meaningful action. There's so much legislation happening. There's so many different ways that we can be engaged. We all need a little guide, right? Haley's been an incredible resource to me. I so look forward to those emails. I do my very best to engage back so Haley knows that she's not shouting out into the void, but that there are people out there listening, waiting for those calls and responding. It's a really meaningful sort of reciprocal relationship that we should be engaging in. That cheerleading, that constant encouragement of being able to do this together is meaningful. And sometimes people need it. It's not enough just to say, here's the link, make the call. You need to follow up and say, hey, how'd that call go? Did the senator's office, pick up the phone when you were pushing Senator Hertzberg this week to pick up the phone for social housing? Did anybody in his office answer? Because in my experience, they didn't. Isn't that a problem? Isn't that something we want to talk about and deal with, right? Helping people sort of process their experience engaging in activism or advocacy or change making, I think it's just as important as getting them engaged in it, because it's in those moments where we find out whether people are going to keep at it or not. And we do not want to lose people once we have an opportunity to have them on our side. An advocate that can continue to climb up that leadership ladder, that can continue to sort of pursue a path, build experience onto more experience, that's a valuable person to have on our side. And it is up to all of us to make sure that we are reducing the barriers to entry when it comes to advocacy. It's not easy. It's truly not easy. I'm sometimes confounded, no matter how much time I spend in it. I'm really confounded by the process, by the amount of votes it takes, by how things go about. And I'm really grateful to the people who are spending their precious time and resources, making sure I'm clearer on how it all works, so that I don't let a frustration become a new barrier for entry for me. So I just wanted to express some of the values that I hold really deeply when it comes to what I consider grassroots community organizing, really building those one-on-one relationships, helping get new folks engaged in this work in a meaningful way that helps them build a long pathway forward, and helping reduce the barriers for people in our community to do that work. And I just want to say thank you to the people, again, in this community who have helped me be a part of that. I wasn't born a housing advocate. I was born into a family that had addiction issues and poverty issues, and we lost what was our first ever generational investment into a home in the 2008 financial crisis. And I put that experience to bed long ago because it was really emotionally traumatizing. And I'm very grateful for the people who helped reactivate that sense of injustice and point me on a path to change making. So big, great gratitude to everyone here, and thanks for the time to share.
Awesome. Thank you, Chelsea. And I'll pass it to Jamarah, who's also another board member of us.
Hi, you guys. Sorry, I'm on the side of the 5 somewhere and have been on calls all day because that's what organizing is. And I first just want to say thank you guys for being here, and everyone else. Chelsea, you've just been doing amazing work, and everyone on this call who's showing up past all of the exhaustion, right? Every single person that we know is so far past burned out, and yet we're still showing up. So just on like a heart level, I want to say thank you so much for what you're doing, and then talk about how that translates into movement work for a lot of us here. I was having a really interesting conversation with some folks who have not been involved in really progressive spaces before, and they were shocked that in LA there were so many progressive victories and other parts of the state as well. well. Hey, Matt. But I said, it's really interesting when you actually look at how some of that happened, and we were talking specific council districts and some citywide seats down here. I said, absolutely, it's amazing, but it's also not surprising. We have some of the best advocates and organizers and people with lived experience leading this work. And that actually goes back to the past 6, 8, 10 years in Southern California and other parts of the state as well. And I made the point that on their own, these people are amazing. But one story that I think that I want to make sure everyone understands is that a lot of these organizers and candidates and other things got their start in tenant organizing, labor organizing, affordable housing organizing, in that similar space. So this is such a fertile training ground, which is amazing work and feels important. And you have those day-to-day wins and losses, and we keep going. And then you have this thing like you had a couple of Tuesdays ago in LA that a lot of folks were caught off guard by, even a week after the election, where they're seeing these massive wins and folks are saying, how did that happen? It's like, because we've been doing the organizing work on the ground, whether it's in Pacoima or Mar Vista or on the east side or where I live in Long Beach, consistently. And when you actually look at it that way, it's been such a fruitful and successful past couple of years, which I take some comfort in, just knowing that as our democracy a little bit crumbles around our feet elsewhere, some really amazing things are happening here. Another thing that I would also say is that there is such a great intersection between different sectors that have previously been a bit siloed, right? So you have housing and homelessness work, and then my background's been more on justice reform, but you're having this amazing marriage come together all over the place in a way that is necessary and also just completely true to families and communities' real life experiences. So while we may want to show up and talk about police reform or talk about SB 9 or whatever it is we want to talk about, that family's probably experiencing 360 degrees of things that deserve our attention, and they deserve to be heard, and they deserve to lead that. So as we kind of approach organizing these days, I think what's interesting is I try and carry a couple of things with me, and just a little bit of background on myself belatedly here. Most recently and forever, I'm George Gascon's campaign manager, so fighting recalls all the time, hence my exhaustion. Last year I was working on 4 anti-recalls, so I really, really, really need those to stop so we can get some sleep and continue to do some work. But one amazing thing I've seen come out of that space, and that was such an amazing victory led by especially women of color, on the very, very grassroots level, which was a beautiful thing to see. But one really important thing that we have worked really hard as a movement to hold and continue to try and do better at all the time is to frankly come from a very trauma-informed place, right? A lot of the families that we're working with, we've talked about it here a lot tonight as well, aren't just here because the policy is something that we think folks in Sacramento should pass or wherever. It's because they're going through that on a personal level, or they lost someone, or they lost their home, like just last week, and how hard that is. So I try and remember that, especially when we are tired and we're stuck on Zoom call after Zoom call, like first world problems, but reminding ourselves that even tonight on this Zoom, I know that there are people that have gone through absolute hell in the past couple of years. I know there's probably someone on this call that is worried about making rent tonight and tomorrow. It's the 30th. So, right. I know that someone is nervous about that here tonight. And it's just, I would just say that the more intentional we get about that as organizers, the more we can actually pause and invite and create a safe space for just that reality, the more people want to stay, because these circles are getting bigger and bigger. The wins are getting bigger, we're actually doing the work. And we need all of you guys to continue to stay here. So I think really supporting each other on a deeply personal level, and whatever that means, giving each other space, giving each other grace, reminding each other of the wins when we have them, and also that it's okay to feel like I can't do this anymore, I'm pulling my hair out, to actually pause and say let's stop and deal with that, because I want you here 6 months from now and a year from now. So you guys are amazing leaders in your spaces. I know a lot of folks here tonight, and love all the new faces as well. I would say abundant housing is a great model of leading both with the heart and very clear policy vision. So thank you guys so much. And we're here as resources for you and to learn from you. Thanks, Annie.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Jamarah. I really appreciate those nice little discussions from you. That was amazing. All right, so let's open up the floor for Q&A. So let's raise our hands, And then we'll call on you for any questions that you guys might have for us in regards to the Housing Advocates Council, the subcommittees, or maybe just questions for our guest speakers. Please raise your hand and we'll call on you. Any questions? No questions? Oh, we have Annie. All right, Annie, go for it.
Hey, thank you so much for the inspiration. One thing on my mind is just how we talk about ourselves and define what we're for. And one thing that I'm interested in hearing your perspectives on is like YIMBY, NIMBY terms and the effectiveness of that. Like I've been trying to move more away from it. And I think sometimes like we as these pro-housing people get very attached to like being these YIMBYs who know a lot. But I'm just interested in hearing like if there are any examples you have of kind of like interesting ways people talk about housing in a way that like brings more people into the tent.
Anybody wants to answer that?
I think, I don't know if I have a great answer, but I definitely just want to respond to that. Something that Chelsea said is meeting people where they're at. And so I know that some people take a lot of pride in sort of the YIMBY term, right? But the NIMBY term can also turn people off. And so using different language can be very beneficial. I think in general, if we say pro-housing, like that sort of thing, it eliminates a little bit of that, like that rub that people might get if they're like, I'm not a NIMBY, right? But I think if we're just talking about like, hey, pro-housing, more housing, housing for all, like those sort of things, that doesn't really categorize anybody. It doesn't put anybody into one kind of camp, especially if they feel like they don't belong there or they don't like how that sounds. But yes, and actually that's pretty great. Natalia just said something in the chat about like asking folks to share their housing stories. It's a good entry point. And I think that that's true. That's part of meeting people where they're at, seeing what they care about, and yes, acting in a housing positive way, as Oren said in the chat. I think that that's what we're looking for. And, shying away from YIMBY, NIMBY, things like that, if we're in a space that we're not sure how that's going to land.
Yeah, and then like also one thing I want to point out is that yeah, we do hear that the NIMBY and then the YIMBY. The YIMBY is like, it could be very like a turnoff for a lot of people, even though we support a lot of housing. But we also have to think about, there's also nurses that don't qualify for affordable housing. Teachers don't qualify for affordable housing. They need housing too. My sister's a teacher, and she we still live with, I still live with my parents. She lives with the parents as well, because it's housing is expensive, and for us to afford housing, we have to drive 2 hours, and we have decent jobs. Everyone's facing this issue, so that's one thing that you have to we really have to think about, is that how can we frame this in a more like nicer way, that we have nurses, we have teachers, we have our first responders who are driving 2 hours to go to their jobs. So that's definitely a climate change issue. So we really have to think about that. So I think it's important to emphasize those big issues, and just to frame it in a more like a nicer way too, because we need housing for everyone. We need affordable housing. We need low-income housing. We also need market rate housing. But we also have to make sure what kind of housing we need in the appropriate neighborhood. So just one of those things to emphasize.
I just want to add to that. Well, first of all, so much appreciation to the Abundant Housing staff for their awesome insights on how to message about housing. One thing that personally I find to be effective from especially for certain audiences, is to kind of talk about the history of housing and just why we have the zoning and land use environment that exists today. And so I think like people take a lot of that for granted. They don't really think about, why do I think that the suburban single family neighborhood is the ideal? Why do I think that everything should be low density, and like the commercial and the residential should be separated, and sort of kind of going over some of the racist intentions that were behind that, you know, the car dependency behind that. You know, I think that's what Housing 101 has been doing very well for abundant housing, is like kind of rooting people in that history, so that then, you know, people can kind of look at the zoning and land use environment today from a fresh perspective and kind of, you know, see that, hey, you know, it doesn't have to be that way. You know, we can question that history and things that we think are like real values. So, okay, should I pass it back to you, Jaime?
Yes, thank you for that. I'll pass it. I have here Josh, who has his hand raised for a while.
Hey everybody, thanks so much. I've been a member of Abundant Housing since the early days that Shane was talking about, when it was just a couple of people sending in letters. With all of the new priorities and all of the new staffers, what metrics do you guys use to measure success now? How do you know that you guys are actually getting things done and doing things differently than just amplifying someone like Cal Yimby? What makes Abundant Housing LA successful and special?
So one of the great successes that we've been pushing forward is a great example is LA Comments. You know, the LA Comments in West LA, it first moved on to the project committee where it was a request. We mobilized a lot of folks to attend to hearings. There were a lot of skaters going against the project. This project is going to provide about 1,000 new units in the area that is unutilized, and 47% of it is going to be affordable housing. So that's one good key example of you guys' action measuring success. There's a number of successes that we have. Also policy, pushing forward our policy agenda, such as we endorse about, I think it was 21 bills, House bills. So making sure that we have people attending to those hearings and then following through to see if those do move forward through the governor signing them. So there's been great successes through our organizing efforts, such as also having 18 chapters within LA County who are focusing grassroots organizing. Our West LA chapter, West Side for Everyone, has been very good in advocating pro housing. They are really focused in pushing forward our agenda, such as also working with candidates who we recently endorsed. They've been really doing canvassing for Aaron Darling, Scott Epstein. So those are some of the successes we see us moving forward. So that's one of the things that we want to. Okay, and organizing is something that it cannot be accomplished in one day. Organizing is something that gets done in 6 months or a year or 2 years. We just have to keep following through and not make sure that things don't fall the cracks. So that's one of the most important things about community organizing. You don't see success the next day. You see success when things start getting like a change. And some of those changes do take like a year or two, but that's how we kind of like see those changes. But also we have those small short-term changes, such as, you know, having more bodies to hearings. So I just wanted to point out. Anybody wants to add into that?
No, sure. That's all great stuff. Those are all definitely successes.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I have also here Randy that he has his hand raised. You want to go on mute?
I think you have to be unmuted. Oh, there I go. Can you hear me now? Can people hear me? Great. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come. I'm, obviously based in the Bay Area, but I follow LA very closely. And having spent the last almost 2 years focusing on trying to get a state bill passed, AB 2050, Stop Ellis Act Eviction Speculators, I've reached conclusions that I had actually before I spent the previous 2 years doing that. And I want to just share those about my thoughts about where abundant housing needs to go. Abundant Housing LA needs to elect someone, and we need to defeat someone. And that change, the housing people elected someone and the housing people just defeated somebody. And you have various races in LA, fortunately, the two Hertzbergs, the Karen Bass race, and Lindsay the two Hertzbergs. And I think that Hertzberg's race against Lindsay Horvath is a perfect example after what happened with social housing being defeated based on his vote, non-vote. So I think you should think strategically about that, because seeing how the politicians respond in Sacramento and in city councils and in my own experience in San Francisco and Berkeley, it really makes a difference who you elect, and it really makes a difference who you've been able to defeat. So I just want to have you think about that in terms of, it's hard in LA because you've had off-year council elections, but now that you have the on-year council elections, you see Gil Cedillo was defeated, which I think was an example of a constituency that came out. But I think abundant housing needs to, this is an opportunity this November to really make your mark, particularly with the new mayor potentially, who could be in debt to abundant housing for all the work they did. So I just want to throw that out.
I really appreciate that, Randy, and I appreciate how much of a supporter you've been of abundant housing for all these years. And you know, what we really need to do is we need to build up a lot more people power. You know, I don't think we're gonna be able to see, you know, the political shifts around housing that are necessary until we start, you know, doing a lot more to increase, you know, the number of people engaged with this. And, you know, so that's why I'm so excited that we're staffing up more this year. I'm excited what Jaime is planning to do for, you know, grassroots organizing. But again, I think like that kind of brings us back to the importance of this council. You know, this is like where we're going to be doing that people power building. And of course, like one of the core responsibilities of people in council, I hope you all like become members of the council, because you know, we're going to be asking people to recruit more people for this and to reach out. And so that's a really important responsibility. And, you know, we're going to be helping you with messaging and ideas. But I think like if we all do a little bit of that and, you know, like find maybe 5 people from our own network who might, you know, be willing to just come to 2 meetings a year to be in the council, you know, they can start recruiting more of their network, you know, kind of like build out from there. Plus, like, you know, every handful of people that join, you know, some people are going to want to take that next step and get even more involved. You know, they might want to like really get involved in endorsements or in organizing, or they want to do presentations. You know, just imagine how much more powerful we can make all of this if we like really get that people power going. So I just want to really encourage people to, you know, get involved with this, spread the word as much as possible. Also, like, we're hiring more organizers right now. So please, if you know anybody who's interested, definitely shoot us an email.
You know, I should mention that LA is really the most difficult political environment for housing in the United States, because we're in San Francisco, the city of San Francisco is like one council district in LA. And New York City is a big city, but they can get everywhere by subway. But even to have meetings among people are very difficult in Los Angeles, just due to the size of the lack of public transit. So your challenges are great, but I see progress being made with Aaron Darling's success and just what happened in this recent June thing. I think it really is showing that your message is getting across. So you guys are doing a great job. Just keep it up.
Also, thank you, Randy. And I'll pass it to Neil, seeing you have your hand raised.
Hi, everyone. I'm Neil Payton. I'm an architect and urban designer. I'm new to this organization, made aware of it because Leonora is on the housing commission of my little town and came across a little bit of an attempt to oust her. Somebody who promotes housing on a housing commission would seem obvious, but that actually made me aware of her, and ultimately actually I suggested that she run for council in Santa Monica, but she demurred. She said at this time, so, you know, there's hope. Anyway, my interest is actually in the intersection of housing and urban design. And specifically, I think of myself as a neighborhood maker. Housing, of course, is a substantial component of neighborhoods. But making a great neighborhood is more than just piling housing into it. It's actually about making housing, designing housing, so that those who live in that housing feel inextricably linked to the neighborhood, and those who don't live in that housing feel connected to those who do. housing, your neighborhood is not only where you live and maybe shop and walk around, it's also where you build your first networks. I always often think about the fact that of the many privileges I grew up with, one of them was the fact that my folks had a network based on our neighborhood, which meant I had a network, and which meant I could ask questions about future opportunities, future jobs. What do people do? What does it mean to be an architect even? In my own work, I've met so many people because we do a lot of affordable housing, public housing revitalizations. I've met so many people who have young people, I mean kids, young kids, never even heard of the profession of architecture. Imagine other things they haven't heard of. How would they if they've never known one or met one? But it's not just that, you know, great neighborhoods allow small businesses to form and grow. And we all love shopping at places where we know the merchants that we're dealing from. But that's not always an opportunity. But we know that the design of a great neighborhood allows that to happen. I think it was Dulce, if I may call you by your first name, who I just am meeting tonight, and I wish I had known about you. Well, not that I lived in that district, but I just wish I had known about you earlier. You spoke about the 15-minute city, which is something that we talk about a lot in my world. And how do you actually make that? And obviously housing is an important part of it. But again, it is the design, the physical design of that housing that it contributes to the making of the 20-minute city. Another important aspect is I've discovered that some folks who are opposed to some housing, and we've all heard this, they talk about the character of their neighborhood, and many of us see that as kind of a red flag, which, you know, stands for other things. And in some cases, I'm sure that's true, but in some cases they actually mean what they're saying, and quite literally, they mean the physical character. And as designers, one of the things that we try to do is think about how to retain aspects of the character of neighborhoods that people love, even while we create more housing in there. So I do think that those issues, some housing advocates never talk about design, and I want to keep that in the forefront because I think it's an important part of overcoming some opposition, and it's an important part of making great and sustainable neighborhoods. So I'm excited to be a part of this, and I hope I'm able to contribute as much as anyone wants to hear from me.
Thank you, Neil. And I'll pass it for our last question. We have a very short time frame right now. I'll pass it to Jamarah.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, one thing that I think is a great resource about abundant housing and being involved in the council is you have these experts, people like Neil. Neil, I haven't seen you in like 5 years, but hi. Because I think so much of housing is questions for people like, right, why are we still having this conversation? Why, if whatever, is inflation going up, why am I not getting a raise? For me, a lot of that question goes back 10 years. I used to work on Kamala Harris's team when we were doing foreclosure relief. So why 10 years later are we still having that conversation? So I think I'll just throw that out there. This is really cool network of experts. A lot of us are kind of wonks, kind of nerds. So added benefit is if someone has a crazy off the wall question about sort of why is housing the way it is, why is it so broken, or how could this work? There's someone in this network that knows the answer to it. So just added benefit, I think, of getting involved.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, all of you guys, for these amazing questions for the presenters. I do want to emphasize that we are hiring. We are looking for organizers. So like as Lenora mentioned earlier, we are expanding. We're used to be 4 people, now we're 5, and now we're probably going to be 10 or 9 soon. So we are expanding our organizing department. So we're going to have more capacity for the grassroots organizers. We're looking for regional organizers, field organizers. So please, if you are interested, please apply. I'm going to pop in my email right here that you guys can reach out to me at Jaime at Abundant Housing LA. So please let us know, and also share this news to anybody that's interested in applying. One last thing, don't forget to fill out the form. We need people like you guys. We need people to really hear your voice, hear your thoughts. You know, sometimes we have certain issues that we deal internally when it comes to policy, and we need you guys' opinion, and it's really important for you guys to have a say. So that's what, like, that's the reason why we have the app. We created the Housing Advocate Council for you guys to provide feedback, but also send us some feedback as well. You know, there's a lot of controversial policies out there. A lot of projects are very controversial, and sometimes we just need your help. So please sign up. If you're not a donor, please donate so you could be a member. And if you already are a donor, you are already part of this council. You just have to fill out the form and you'll be added to it. And I'll be reaching out to you. You'll be getting your t-shirt that's about abundant housing in LA and your button. And then also you'll be getting your onboarding email, which lays out all the important things that you need to get you up to speed with messaging and all that good stuff. Any other last words from our team that you guys would like to mention?
Well, I just want to thank everybody so much for participating in tonight's meeting, and also for the lively chat that's going on. I really appreciate Dulce, Chelsea, you know, the amazing speakers, and Shane, and yeah, just really looking forward to continuing this conversation and continuing really this energy, and together we'll be achieving very great things.
Yeah, and thank you all of you guys for that amazing stuff. Leonora, want to say something?
Haley, do we have the webpage live where people could go to like when they want to refer to it and if they want to apply later?
Yes, so we have a page for the Housing Advocates Council. You can navigate to our website, abundanthousingla.org, and it's going to be under Take Action. So I'm going to also drop the link right now, so you get the link directly.
You guys should be getting an email next week or soon with your onboarding next steps. So be on the lookout for that. Yeah, anybody else, any other things you guys would like to say, staff members?
And don't forget to send it to your friends and your networks, let them know about it, you know, let them know, you know, you just want to send them our front page, you know, if you feel like they are interested in joining the council, send them the council page. You know, definitely start that outreach, you know, after all this energy that we've had tonight. So thanks everybody.
All right, well, thank you so much everyone for joining in this afternoon, and just thank you all for you guys being here, and hopefully we can provide some good energy and some good recommendations from you guys. You know, you guys are the reason why Abundant Housing in LA exists. You know, we started as a volunteer-based organization, so keep it up and let's continue this momentum going. All right, everyone, have a good afternoon.
Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.